for those of you that are here with us tonight, welcome. And this is the August version of the Friends of Gold Butte speaker series. And we have the pleasure of having Rayette Martin here with us tonight. And Rayette is a archaeologist, and she is going to talk about, what are you going to talk about, Rayette?
How you can help preserve and protect our archaeological sites.
Cool. All right. And so we would ask those of you that are here, if you would please hold your questions till the end of Rayette's talk. And if you need to ask a question or you're just burning to, if you can put it in the chat, if you're all familiar with how to do that, down at the bottom of your screen, you can type in a question. And if it's something that needs to be answered mid-presentation, I will just let me know and I will speak it to Rayette. Otherwise, when she's done, you can put your microphones back on and you can ask her questions verbally or in the chat and I can ask them. So with that, I'm going to let Rayette get going. And again, thank you for coming.
Okay, as I said, tonight I'm going to talk about how you can help preserve archaeology in Nevada. I am a public archaeologist, which means I work with different communities, try and get them engaged in archaeology and preservation. And I am the executive director of Nevadans for Cultural Preservation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been around about 11 years. And our tagline is preservation through education. And we really believe that we cannot expect people to care for things they know nothing about, follow laws they've never heard of, or protect things they cannot identify. So I'm going to talk about archaeology. I'm going to talk about cultural sites and cultural heritage. And I have this big wordy definition of cultural heritage that I came up with. And it's the physical materials combined with historical events and the accumulated knowledge, shared ideals, and core values that have shaped both the identity of a group of people and the essence of a specific location and community. As archaeologists, we really focus on the physical materials and we match those up with historical events. And so you'll hear me talk about context later on, but really it's these things working together that really provide that picture into the past and can help us answer questions about different lifeways and things that occurred. And cultural heritage, a lot of times, especially out in Gold Butte and other areas, when we go visit cultural sites, they are pre-contact, which refers to Native American sites before Euro-Americans and others came into the area. But I do want to stress that these are still important areas to these folks. They're still here, even though we don't see them on the landscape as often because we put them on reservations and colonies. So there are 32 Indian reservations and colonies that stretch across Nevada. And these tribes are all unique with traditions that span many generations. But like the intricate strands that form a beautiful basket, these tribes are one and their culture is strong and tightly woven together. And so this is a quote taken from Nevada Indian Territory and a map that I created to kind of show the distribution of folks and the locations of these different reservations and colonies across the state. And so when we talk about cultural heritage sites, a very popular one are petroglyphs. And you can see those in Gold Butte, but also in this photograph, we've got students that are out learning how to record them at Valley of Fire, especially at Bottle Rock. And these would have been created likely pre-contact into contact. Tokima Cave, that's on Forest Service land. That is a pictograph site. That's where they've added the pigment to the rocks. And this site is currently in use. So we have use that begins pre-contact into current times. Agave roasting pits. This is something that's most commonly seen in southern Nevada. It's harder to see them in northern Nevada. At Red Rock National Conservation Area. There are a ton of them. Gold Butte has them as well, and that's where they would have dug a hole, put the agave and plant materials and coals in there, covered it up, let it do a slow roast, and then when they dug it out, it would leave the fire cracked rock in a ring, because the limestone that they're using only holds the heat once, and then it chemically changes and can't hold heat again. So we end up with that donut shape on the landscape. And then we have evidence of when maybe the Spanish Trail was through here, maybe later times, but in petroglyph trail at Sloan Canyon, which has over 1,700 motifs, you see what looks to be, Europeans or Spanish making their way through there. It could be later times, because the people in this area did not ride horses, the Native Americans. So seeing somebody on horseback is post-contact usually. And the Spanish Trail came through the Sloan Canyon general area in 1829. All right, and then we get the Old Mormon Fort, and that's the first non-native settlement in southern Nevada, and it was established in 1855. This is a state park. You can still go visit. It's downtown Las Vegas, so not the nicest area, but I highly recommend taking a trip through there. Their visitor center has a lot of good information that isn't just about the fort, but about the area. And the fort was only occupied by the LDS at the time, the Mormons, for a very short period of time. So it talks about the entire history of the fort. All right, and then as we're going, so we've got the LDS coming through, they're establishing settlements, and then we end up with town sites like St. Thomas. St. Thomas is on the National Park Service land there south of Overton, and it was inundated by Lake Mead, but now is exposed. And so that was founded around 1865. And these pictures are from, on the top left, when it was not underwater. And the one below that was as the water was rising. And the one to the right is what it looks like today. And so you have these settlements, they're farming, they're ranching, and that economy is supporting some of the mining industry. So they're providing goods to these area mines. And these are some pictures from Crescent Mill, and that is in Lincoln County. And mining was a big industry. It was boom or bust all over the place. But this is at Basin and Range National Monument, Crescent Mill, and it was utilized in the 1860s. Then down in southern Nevada, Las Vegas, we've got the Spring Mountain Ranch, which is a state park as well. And again, it's that ranching community that's kind of settling the area. And that was in 1876. And cultural sites like Bullionville Cemetery, that's out at Cathedral Gorge in Lincoln County, and that was in the 1870s. Bullionville was established to process the ore that was coming down from Pioche, which was kind of a big deal. It wasn't the Comstock load, but it still generated millions of dollars worth of ore. And then we pass by things like the charcoal kilns up at Wheeler Pass. Those were established in 1875 for the mining in that area. Then the railroad comes through, and the railroad really changed the Las Vegas area and communities like Caliente along the main rail line. And we find evidence of this railroad in mining camps. So we got mining camps, ranches, then we got the railroad, and we got the camps along the railroad. But we also end up with small gauge rail lines that are going to the mines. And then if those aren't in use anymore, we're taking that that railroad ties and things like that and repurposing it. And so this is at Desert National Wildlife Refuge at the Corn Creek Visitor Trails. You can see an old cabin that was built in the 1920s from old railroad ties. And there's never a shortage of trash. So the evidence that we find as we go through, especially the historic sites and building of mines and ranches and railroad, is the trash that they leave behind. So those are all cultural sites, right? They connect us to an activity, to a place. They help us fill out like the settlement of Nevada, pretty much like the settlement of the West goes that way. And so when you visit them, you are like, oh yeah, I'm in a place that was built or used or modified in the past. And so it's kind of obvious that you're at a cultural site. Now, the reason it's a cultural site is because there's things that are made, used, or modified by humans. And then there's also oftentimes artifacts. And so the context for an artifact is the place that it was left. And that connection is what tells the story. So for example, we're at a mining site. If we walked up to this site, we would be like, ah, something happened here. It was mining. It's old because we don't use charcoal kilns anymore or have smokestacks or live in stone cabins. And then we find artifacts like this tin can that we can learn more information about that site from. So the tin cans can tell us the types of food they were eating, obviously, but it can also tell us where the people were from. So if we're finding Chinese soy bottles and ceramics, okay, maybe the Chinese were here. If we're finding goods and materials that were common for women to use, okay, they had women at the mining camp or children, and it can tell us kind of how many people were there and maybe for how long. So once you remove the can, then that information about that place goes away. So the same thing when we look at a pre-contact site. So this is a roasting pit, so they were cooking there. There's like a rock shelter with petroglyphs and pictographs. So those are all things, if we saw them, we'd be like, ah, okay, something happened here. But then we get the artifact, which is the broken bit of ceramics. And there are specialists that look at ceramics and they can tell us what time period that style or makeup was usually used, where it comes from, where did they source the clay. And that gives us more information about that particular cultural site. And then again, leads us to the landscape and what was happening there. And oftentimes we're visiting the same places that were used pre-contact when the first settlers were coming in, and then now we're recreating there. So this is Valley of Fire. We still go there. The pre-contact Native Americans were there, leaving their markings on the rocks. The Perkins family and other folks who were some of the first pioneer families in the Moapa area left their marks there. And now we're coming along and visiting these same places. And we'll find artifacts that show that as well. So we have the square head nail, you know, stone tools, railroad ties, and we'll find these things all in the same place. So that's a long history of a place. We can tell a lot that people have been coming back. And I kind of did an overview of the types of cultural sites that we come across and the importance of context so that you understand why there's laws that protect these sites. So it's illegal to remove, damage, or destroy cultural resources on public lands. The first law that came into effect for that was in 1906. And we have our own, and that's a federal law. We have our own Nevada revised statutes that cover it. And then it took until 1979 for a new law to come through that protects cultural sites. And unfortunately, because there was such a gap between 1906 and 1979, the penalties and stuff were that of 1906. So growing up, I'm sure a lot of you, either you participated in or you had family members or others who would go out artifact hunting. My dad used to dig up arrowheads along with his dad and other folks. And it was just kind of like something to do. It's, I think of it like an Easter egg hunt, like an adult version of that, a reason to get outside. But that's because people weren't being told about the laws weren't being enforced, and there weren't stiff penalties. So why not go ahead and go out and do that? The other thing that took a while to get were laws that protect specifically burial goods. And that's what we call NAGPRA. That's our federal law. It didn't come around until 1990. And it protects human remains, funerary objects, sacred objects, and objects of cultural patrimony. That can be hard to prove. But for example, in this photograph, this is in Nelson, where they have kind of a visitor type center and a bunch of mining artifacts in the area. In the visitor center, in one of the cases, they have a photograph that has this white box on it, because I put that there, where they show the human remains that they had dug up with the pot and the other objects that are in this display case. So it's pretty easy to say that this would have violated NAGPRA because they have evidence of those things being together. So one of the things that we're doing is repatriating. That means giving these objects back and human remains back to the tribes, but it's a long process that has been quite challenging and time consuming, but is very, very important. So that is something to be mindful of, that there are laws that protect that. And these laws have to be in place because people do bad things. And they may not think that what they're doing is terrible, but you know, scratching your name into a historic building is going to stay with that building, and it's going to change what people are looking at. And it's these are our resources for everybody. They belong to everyone, so they're damaging and defacing our resources. And of course, there's the obvious. You probably shouldn't be shooting at stuff or shooting paintballs. So on the left, that's a mining building that's been shot up. And on the right, that's paintball residue in the white that's been shot at pictographs and petroglyphs. People think things are cool and they want to take them home with them, so they will cut them out. So that's an issue. And I never really thought that grave robbing was something that people still engaged in, but they do. And on the left-hand side there, that's at Pine Grove Cemetery up by Urington area. And then on the right, that's down at Gold Butte. So people will dig up shallow graves to find grave goods, and the one on the right is a historic grave. And then people will gather objects. They might take the cool things home and then place the rest of them in piles. And what that does is that has changed the context. So the object isn't removed, so you weren't naughty and took it home and stole it, but you've moved it from where it was left. So now it's harder for us to understand the story of that place and connect that artifact to an activity. So those are all bad things. There's more bad things that happen, but the reason I wanted to talk to you all tonight is more about how you can help save our heritage by participating. I'm going to talk about the Citizen Stewardship Pledge, which is just following these principles when you go out and visit sites. I have an off-road preservation ambassador program you can be involved in. We do graffiti removal at cultural sites, so you can go out and get dirty and give it a shot yourself. You can support archaeology as a field and then learn more and share what you're learning. So the Citizen Stewardship Pledge, or Steward Pledge, is on our website. And these are kind of basic. So a lot of you already know this or follow these ethics. But if you know somebody else, you could maybe point them to it. Or as a club or a group, you can be like, okay, we're all going to sign the Citizen Pledge. And that's to enjoy our historic and pre-contact cultural sites by taking pictures and leaving things where they're found. To stay on designated trails and routes so that we're not damaging sensitive cultural areas. For example, a lot of ceramics and stone tools, the average person cannot identify. So if there's a barrier or a marker there, it could be protecting something you can't recognize. So go ahead and follow the rules that they have there and assume that you would be causing damage if you don't. When you're visiting petroglyphs and pictographs, it says to do it carefully, but essentially you don't want to be touching them, stepping on them, doing any kind of rubbings, you know, where you take paper and do the crayon. Nobody really does that anymore. Putting any kind of chalk or anything like that in them so that they show up better on photos. We just kind of want to leave them as they are and observe them from a safe distance and enjoy them. And when visiting historic mines, buildings, anything like that, there is a risk of collapse, of injury to yourself. So A, we don't want it to fall apart any faster than it's already going to, but B, the main thing is really your safety. Because if you were to go in underneath this or shoot and get hurt, then they may have to take everything and bulldoze it down because it's a risk to safety. So do your best, stay out, take care of yourself. And then report any damages that you find. I have information on that later, but really, if you report it, then we know it's happening, then we can prevent additional issues. So for example, if you find graffiti attracts more graffiti. If you find new trails that are walking and eroding the side of where maybe a foundation is and that building is going to collapse because people are taking a trail, report it so that that doesn't eventually happen. And of course, practice leave no trace principles. And when you're able to, remove modern trash, mylar balloons, I'm sure those of you who go hiking find them quite often. I wonder if there'll ever be a time when they're not out there, but I had a birthday and somebody bought me one. So I was like, oh no, I'm gonna make sure I don't contribute to this mylar balloon issue. But cut it and put it in the garbage, and hopefully it doesn't make it out on our landscape. And the big thing is really just share the importance of preserving our heritage with others. A lot of people, this isn't their hobby, this isn't their interest area, and they may inadvertently cause damage. So if you can kindly share the importance and help them visit things more respectfully, then that would be a huge help. Okay, the online reporting, you can go to our website under Take Action, and it says report damage. I also have some reporting cards that I will give to Brenda, and those can get distributed. That way, when you're out, you take pictures with your cell phone nowadays anyway. You take pictures of the issues. Then when you get cell phone reception, you scan the QR code and you can fill out the report, including uploading any photos from your phone. All right, so the Preservation Ambassador web program, I'm going to show a video. I hope it works. And this is really what a lot of us like doing. So when I talk about OHV Preservation Ambassador, you don't have to have a side-by-side or ride on an ATV. If you're accessing cultural sites in a four-wheel drive vehicle that gets dirty, this is for you as well. So. essentially, what the video is saying is, you know, as people go out and they enjoy the landscape and they go on their adventures, when they come across sites, they can participate in preserving them by taking pictures and reporting information and cleaning up the places that they've been. And this is a target audience for Nevadans for cultural preservation, because a lot of new side-by-side owners and other folks who may not have grown up doing the hiking and camping and, you know, all those kinds of things. This is new to them. And so we want to put it right up front for them. Hey, there are these cool places you're going to visit, and you can help us by participating in their preservation. And I've had a really good response from the off-road community and the side-by-side community. And I'm going to the off-road summit. They have an annual summit, and this year it's in Virginia City at the beginning of next month. So this is definitely something that we are focusing on as a nonprofit to get the people who are actually out there to participate. So hang on. Oop. See if I can get to the next slide. There we go. All right, so to be an OHV Preservation Ambassador, this is something anybody here can do. Like I said, there is a 10-minute training course. It is very easy. And as you watch a little video, it asks you a couple questions. And then you hit submit and you're ready to go. Then you go out, you're doing your thing, you're enjoying being outdoors, and any cultural site you come across, you can report if it looks good or if there's any damage. And the reason we want you to report if it looks good is because when it doesn't, then we can shorten that window of time of when we know something bad happened. In addition to that, we want to show that people are engaged with these sites and they care about them or helping us take care of them. And then you can go above and beyond and adopt a site, and then you can monitor your site annually. Now, this is different from the Nevada Site Stewardship Program. Sounds like the same thing, because stewardship, this is what stewardship is. In the Nevada Site Stewardship Program, where Samantha came and talked about it, you take a 6-hour in-person training, you get assigned to a particular site, you go out, you get a site introduction, and it's kind of like that's your site you have to check on. With this, these are places that you're already going. Where do you already like to recreate? What do you already like to do? And then you just, in addition to enjoying yourself doing that, then you can do this little piece and contribute and report on it. So this is something we've been doing. And if you do the online training, I will send you a super cool decal of the logo. And you can say, I'm a preservation ambassador, which is awesome. And then people will ask you about it and you can share it. And the reason it's so important, I'm going to talk about what happened out in, this is not Nevada, this is in the Arizona, the Grand Parashant National Monument. So I have gone and spoken with the Kokopelli Club, and it's been a while since I've done that. And that's your OHV club that's out there in Mesquite. So I'm not a mole, I'm not a spy, but I am friends and part of a ton of these Facebook groups. And I just want to see what's going on. I like going out there. And this came up. So somebody went out and they found this damage to a cabin, and they got upset, as you all would get upset. We're pretty up, you know. All right. And so you see here on the front of the cabin, it says Aramados Off-Road. And then on the inside there, on top of the fireplace, you can not really see it that well because it's dark, and it has that same name. And what it is this is an off-road club out of Las Vegas. It's primarily Spanish speaking. And they had put up some of these posts of them partying out there. And Kokopelli figured it out. Hey, you guys are the ones, because A, you wrote your name on there. B, you posted you know, you guys being out there, you did this damage. And they got really upset. And then when I say they, there's a couple members who run the Facebook and are more vocal. And they were like, you need to get back out there and you need to clean that up. And so then they went back out, the Armados Club went back out and they cleaned it up. And so this is where my education, I learned a lesson that I need to educate folks on the fact that removing graffiti is an issue as much as putting graffiti on there. And this is why it would have been nice if the Kokopelli Club would have reported it to me or proper law enforcement. So what they did, and I would have done this too, had I not already known, is they went to local law enforcement, like your police department, and they said, this is what we found, here's our pictures, here's our evidence. And then local law enforcement didn't know how to reach the people at the Parashant National Monument to do anything about it. And because you have to contact the archaeologist, which is counterintuitive. You would think you would contact their law enforcement. And you have to do kind of both, right? You have to let law enforcement know and you have to let the archaeologist know so that they can work together, because the archaeologist is going to care about the preservation of that resource, and law enforcement, it's their job to care about prosecuting for law, right? Number one, it's human safety. Number two, then it's like resources. And so law enforcement may not see an issue with people going and cleaning this up, but the archaeologist is going to be able to say, no, we don't want to do that because it damages it. So this is where they had taken and removed part of the sandstone on the outside of the building. So when you stand out and you look at it, like, yeah, they cleaned it up. And then you get close and you're like, oh no, look at the damage they caused. And that was just them not knowing how to remove it properly. Like, I would have been more than happy to work with the archaeologist and the people from that club to get it cleaned up. But the damage now is worse because we can't bring back the surface of the rock. And then they were pressure washing on the inside and it removed, you know, the age, the coloring. So now it looks like it's whitewashed on the inside. So that's the importance that you guys can bring to this is, hey, I saw something that's wrong. Now I can report that online through, you know, Nevadans for Cultural Preservation or through the Nevada Site Stewardship Program so that things can get handled properly. Here's an example of graffiti removal that the nonprofit was contracted to do. So this is an area that's got 30+ years of graffiti on it. And here we are testing different chemicals because we want to see what works, what doesn't work. And then we're out there with little cotton balls, testing different things, and we move our way up into additional graffiti removal techniques. And then we get it clean as you can, but it will never go back to the way it was before. And so another way that you guys can help preserve and protect these cultural resources is if you feel inclined, you can join us at one of our graffiti removal events. And our next one is September 14th, and we're going to be out at the Cold Creek Ranch, removing graffiti from a historic garage. And that's on our website if you're at all interested in that. It's not for everybody. Here's another example. This whole wall was covered and there's pictographs underneath. In the previous one, there are petroglyphs that are around the area. And then we got pictographs, but this is the before and then after. So we got these amazing things. You guys already care about them because that's why you're here tonight. You can visit them responsibly. You can report the damages you find. You can understand why it's important to report those damages to the right people so that additional damage doesn't occur. And you can support archaeology. And this was a topic that came up in one of our nonprofit board meetings, right? I really put an emphasis on protecting the resource itself and the context. But what about archaeology as a whole? So archaeologists study the past through the material remains that were left behind. That's our most basic definition. And why would that be important? And you may watch programs on the pyramids, and you may watch on Pompeii and that kind of thing. But archaeologists, they're telling us about the past. And when we find these artifacts and these cultural sites, it can support, change, or contradict assumptions and or written history. So when we read about a mining site, for example, they're going to talk about how much ore was taken. They're going to talk about maybe who was the postmaster, that kind of thing. But there are a lot of people that are missing from that historical record and a lot of details. And so we can sort through the trash and other things and find out, oh, hey, there was a brothel here. Yeah, because we found X, Y, and Z, and they never wrote about it. Or, you know, this was happening because we found, let's see, what's a good example? I like that you can find diaphragm screws. All right, so in the past, brothels and stuff like that, women for contraception and family planning would use diaphragms, and they would have a wire in them. And so that will be left. And so you can go to a ranch, for example, and you're like, okay, well, they had 12 kids, but they also had these diaphragm wires. So they were trying to practice family planning. Or this is how you can tell that there was a brothel there, because there's a whole bunch of them in different sizes. It's just one weird little wire can tell you a bunch of information. The same thing with medicines, if you find medicine bottles and that type of thing. So it just, or I've had people say, oh, there were no Chinese. The history doesn't say that there were Chinese in this area. And then archaeologists find a whole bunch of Chinese ceramics. And like I said, the soy ceramics, the jugs that they would keep the soy sauce, or opium vials and pipes and stuff like that. So we do find things that change the way our history is. And the other thing was it can help us solve some modern problems. When we think about climate change, for example, and whether you believe climate change is human caused or not, the climate, if it were to get significantly warmer, the Virgin branch of the Ancestral Puebloans that were down in Overton area, and they, when it got real tough, they left, right? How did they manage that? What did that look like? Other rise and fall of civilizations, when we get to a certain size and then we start having natural disasters, you know, that kind of stuff. And that's basics as preserving non-renewable resources and data for the future. So I am going to ask you at the very end of this, if you have any idea why archaeology is important, and if you'd like to share that with me, because it's something that came up and it wasn't something I really thought about. How do I articulate this? Who would even care? You know, like, so if you have some ideas, that would be great. And the other thing is what you're doing tonight is just learning more and then being able to share that with others who are interested. And Nevadans for Cultural Preservation, we have our speaker series. We have a talk about every month from different area experts and professionals. And the talks range from, you know, high school level kind of information into people who are talking over my head. They range from interpreting, well, not interpreting, but recording, for example, petroglyphs and pictographs to the Chinese railroad workers. I mean, it's kind of all over the place. And then those are virtual events just like this, and we record them and put them on our YouTube. Right now, we have something that's kind of interesting. Land art is now becoming historic. It was something that was pretty popular in the 1960s and 70s. And we have what's called a story map, which is really neat. You're able to like scroll through and it shows you on a map, and you can zoom in and click on things that show you about those land art pieces in the Vegas area. And then it has information about 10 contemporary artists who created their own pieces in response to the land art movement. So something you can scroll through and look at. So I recommend taking a peek at that. And then you can get involved with Nevadans for Cultural Preservation. You can join our email list. I send out one monthly email. That's it, just one. You can see what other events we're holding. You can help us out by donating, just getting involved. So I'm still not used to doing talks virtually. I'm used to seeing people's faces and responding, but I do want to thank you all for taking the time out of your evening to go over how you can help preserve and take care of our cultural heritage in Nevada. Hopefully I gave you some new avenues you haven't thought of before and gave you some additional, ideas to think about. So I'm going to stop my presentation and we can open it up for questions. Sure.
Rayette, I have a question. Oh,
Yeah.
last weekend I was up by Ely and we were trouncing around in the hills, enjoying the 50-degree weather. It was awesome.
Nice.
And there were quite a few, look to be old can scatters in certain places. And I have a really hard time not picking up that stuff because I don't do litter. But I've learned, because I work here, that I'm not supposed to pick it up. And there were a lot of things that, I didn't even pick them up because it was, we were just driving by basically.
Yeah.
But I noticed also that those can scatter sites tended to gather not historical garbage as well. And is that, if my volunteers were out picking up garbage and, we do if it's rusty, if it looks old, you leave it. If you can read the label on the Bud Light bottle, you pick it up. So I guess it's good to leave them there, but I just can't quite grasp that. Is there a?
Okay. So it's really hard because as we get older, our trash becomes historic, right?
Right.
It's a 50-year mark. So you're like, I grew up with that. That's modern. And then you're like, oh no, that's historic now, right? So aluminum cans with our traditional ones that we see today are becoming historic in the next 2 years. Right? So that's the big issue is modern trash becoming historic, and there's so much more of it, right? So back in the day, they reuse stuff. When I was reading accounts of people's lives, they were like, oh yeah, we canned peaches. And they're like, we ate canned peaches. They're not eating 10 cans and tossing them out. They're getting them from the orchard and they're canning them at home in mason jars and then reusing the mason jars and reusing the mason jars and reusing the mason jars. Whereas we're like, oh, I'm going to pop open this little plastic thing and eat it and toss it. So, yes, trash attracts trash. And just like some of those sites I was talking about, you have like the pre-contact, the contact, and now we're there and now this is happening. Those trash dumps collected. So you want to get the involvement. So if I were out with you on your cleanup, that would make it easier. I'd be like, sure, take that, take that, take that, take that, take that. Or you have, somebody who knows the difference between the two. And when in doubt, you leave it in place. If you can't tell for sure, then you leave it.
Right, if there's some doubt as to, whether it's old enough, if it's hitting that 50-year mark or not, but because people just seem to throw things down and, it makes you stop and think, okay, well, am I keeping future people from knowing we were here? It's okay, because we were slobs.
We're pretty gross.
Okay.
No, that's the thing.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. Yeah.
Well,
Right.
think about the number of people that were here during pre-contact times. Right? Then think of the number of people who came over to do some mining, and then with them they brought the ranchers and the other people that had an industry to support it.
Mhm.
Okay, then we get the railroad. Now we got these railroad state and where our population grows. And even now, today, if you look just at the Reno area and the Las Vegas area, the rest of that is still pretty not very populated. So our trash as a whole will tell people in general where we were. We don't need our modern day, you know, can on the side of the road in Gold Butte to really help us figure that out in the future.
Because there was a road, they'll know we were there. And because of that fabulous new restroom, they'll know we were there. So,
Yeah, they'll find that privy, that pit, and then hopefully they won't dig it.
right?
Like our
Yeah.
bottle hunters do today. They're like, oh, all the good stuff's in the old
Yeah.
latrine hole. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, not to my satisfaction. I want to be able to pick it all up.
No.
But
And so there are instances where an archaeologist can come, record that the trash was there, get an idea of what was there, and then it all gets cleaned up. So there are situations where that is appropriate, right? But it doesn't happen often.
right. Well, I won't pick it up. Just leave it. So,
We got solar fields to survey before.
right.
We'll pick up trash.
Does anyone else have a question or comment?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
So let's say we're out on a hike and we come up to a petroglyph wall, or let's say we're just going down a trail and here comes and so somebody's at this wall and they're putting graffiti on.
Okay.
Obviously, we can't beat them up as much as we'd like to.
True. I know.
Unless there's no witnesses, maybe.
I'm like wink, wink. Yeah.
So, I mean, I know we could take pictures of them unless that makes them angry and they attack us. But, you know, so what do we do in a case like that? Or a side-by-sides flying through the desert, completely disregarding the trails,
Mhm.
signs, you know.
So at the petroglyph camp, the beautiful thing is, because that's a cultural site, I know that the chain of command for that. So you want to treat it like a crime scene, just like you would find somebody vandalizing a building in town, right? You don't want to approach them. They could stab you. You know, you never know. If they're dumb enough to be spray painting something like that, then they're dumb enough to like attack you. So you want to think, okay, they were wearing a brown hoodie and a blah, 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 driving a F-150 license plate. No. If you can gather it. And then you take that information back, and that is something where we might be able to catch them in the act. In which case you could try and call local law enforcement and see if they would contact a ranger for you. And or go out, because sometimes they have cross-jurisdictional abilities, right, to do that, because we want to catch them. That's the best thing we can do is catch them in the act. So that's what I would do if I could see them. And then I would also follow up with that by reporting it online through my website, because then if that law enforcement officer gets a call for domestic violence and he forgets about what you told him and doesn't know who to report it to, it still will make it where it needs to go. So always back up. I've reported to local law enforcement, or I told some so-and-so, but back it up by sending in a report. And that way, you know, you're covered.
So like Gold Butte,
Mhm.
we really don't have rangers out there, I don't think.
No.
So yeah, we just to catch them in the act with an actual law enforcement officer would be pretty difficult.
I know, and that's why the cross-jurisdictional sometimes works out. You know, because National Park Service you guys are far enough, they're not going to be out there either, but sometimes they can cross boundaries, and maybe we'll be lucky and there's somebody out there. But yeah, the odds of catching somebody in the act are really slim. That's why it was so great with the example that I used, that the people were stupid enough to put the name of their club on there, and then also post pictures of them partying out there at the time in which it occurred.
So pictures kind of qualify as catching them in the act then.
Yeah, and that's why it's so great. So say it's you know, Whitney Pocket or somewhere where everybody goes. If I get 10 reports for Whitney Pocket saying, looks good, looks good, looks good, then you send me, look at this, you know, Yahoo did this. And then you have a picture, then I can like if they get to the point where they can prosecute him, the person doing it, they can say, it looked good on this day. We know this was all stuff that you'd done, you know, so we're kind of building up a history that helps narrow that and helps law enforcement. So, yeah, all of that helps. And I don't care if I get 10 reports in the same day that everything looked good. And I don't care if I get 10 reports that somebody spray painted you know, obscenities. Okay, cool. Thank you. Because now we have different pictures and we have, you know, that kind of thing. So don't feel bad if you see something and you're like, somebody probably already said something. You know how we get complacent like that? We're like, oh, I don't want to blow the whistle. Oh, I don't know if that's old or new, or, you know, that kind of thing. Just send it. Let us figure that out, right? That's not your job. Like, let us do it.
Anyone else?
Yes, Rhett, this is Mitch. I wonder if you would be at all interested in doing a little longer on-site out in Gold Butte sometime this season, sometime maybe a whole one-day workshop for a lot of our volunteers and members, where we do it out on site out in the monument.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that. You guys could pick a particular area that you find of interest or have issues with, and I'd be more than happy to talk about it while we're out there.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, so Brenda and I will chat with you a little more about that. I think that'd be a great activity and a good opportunity for a lot of our members to be able to come out and sign up for something like that.
Yeah. And I think it kind of takes away, like, if we could all practice doing something too, just practicing it, you know, scanning the QR code, hitting the submit button, give me a whole bunch of test things. Oh, okay, that's not that hard. That way when something comes up too, they know they're more comfortable with using it.
We've had people in our volunteer group that have found little bits of graffiti here and there, and we were doing something else, like on a trash pickup or a restoration or something, and they whip out their spray bottle and their little rag and they go to work, and pretty soon
It's gone.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, I would not have brought that rag, so this is what you use, you know, and I'm like, okay, lesson learned. So that's cool that they retain that information and carry that stuff with them in case of, you know, do that.
Yeah, and there's so every land manager and archaeologist and individual is different. So in Gold Butte, for example, I know there are a handful of people who've done graffiti remediation training type stuff, and they've got the archaeologist, okay, go ahead and you're allowed to do this, that, or the other, because as you saw in the pictures, it can go wrong, right?
Right.
And we don't want to make more damage. But yeah, simple things like a little charcoal that somebody's picked up from the campfire and written on there. Well, that sandstone will eventually soak that in. So if we get a little dry paintbrush, dust it off, done. Right? And then we're not causing damage and we're preventing it from getting soaked into the rock and that kind of thing. I do want to emphasize, if there is anything that you want to do like that, you always want to get written permission from the archaeologist that manages that land, because that ARPA, the Archaeological Resource Protection Act, even though you're doing something positive and you think you're doing like a good thing, and you go and you accidentally deface it more, you can get slapped with an ARPA violation. Not that they would want to do that for you, but those folks who cleaned that up, not only did they do the damage, then they cleaned it up and made more damage. They could have been prosecuted. And then all their vehicles would have been forfeited and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, and the reason for that is just that example, right?
Well, these two, they had been through the training and, you know, had been on many projects where they cleaned graffiti, so they were all excited to have something to do besides pick up trash.
Oh yeah. And whenever I do graffiti events, I always have like a nail magnet and other things for people who don't want to scrub the rock with a toothbrush. Yeah. Everybody's different.
It's always good to have the magnet for the fire sites and stuff, because they burn the pallets and then there's a million.
Yeah, yeah, there's never a shortage of nails.
No. Oh, someone loves the nail magnet.
Oh, Linda Wagner. Linda has, yeah, been out with me before.
Good idea. Okay.
Yeah. Any other
Anything else, Rayette,
questions?
or anybody else want to ask Rayette a question or? make a
Because
comment?
seriously, feel free to ask me anything. When I put together a presentation of this nature, I never know what my audience's exposure is or knowledge is. So I worry that I'm repeating things that you already know. So please take this time to ask me whatever questions you might have. Or any kind of situations you found yourself in. And if you don't want to bring that up, I have questions for you. And my question was, why is archaeology important?
If you refuse to learn from the past, you're condemned to repeat it.
And if you guys don't want to chime in and speak, you can write it in the chat. Why is archaeology important? Because I always find this difficult, right? Because I write for grants. And, you know, it takes money and stuff to do archaeology. And you think, okay, well, this money could be feeding kids. This money could be going to other more, you know, diabetes research. This could be going to this, that, or the other. So if I were to stand up and say, archaeology is important because, does anybody have their because?
Because that you haven't already brought up.
Mm-hmm. Or phrased in a different way.
Well, a lot of our past cultures have found cures for things that we can use today instead of very expensive drugs and synthetic things. So it's important to learn about this.
Right, because it can solve issues in the present, right?
Right.
And so one of the things I thought about too was, you know, the Las Vegas Springs Preserve is in the process of building like a traditional garden, like a new garden, so from the area. And so when we learn more about the plants that thrive in these environments and their you know, and what they were used for, not only medicinal, but maybe for feeding people or whatever, if we come across crop issues or things like that, maybe we can learn more from these plants that aren't even on our radar, you know, as everyday folks. That's not even on our radar. Maybe there's this other thing that's going to work much better for us. So yeah, there's those kinds of practicalities, and you guys are on here because you probably like it. Right? It's interesting. It's nice to connect to place and connect to the past and enjoy these things on our public lands. And so I appreciate you all for joining us and learning more about how you might be able to participate. I hope to see some people taking the OHV Preservation Ambassador training. I'd love to send out some decals and add to that list of folks. It's very low pressure, just a way to learn how to do more. So, all right, I think that's it. If nobody else has any other questions or comments. All right, so this is our why. We have learned about how people lived before us. Today, for example, we have complicated our food chain. I hope to see us as a culture return to some of the literal roots. Yeah, that's about the food too. Yeah, who knows?
I had a friend of mine say something just recently about, what did he say? He said 90% of the food that we eat wasn't around 100 years ago, because the stuff we eat is hardly recognizable because it's so processed and so manipulated before it actually gets into our systems. And then also 90% of the diseases we have today weren't around 100 years ago either.
Yeah. So there's,
perhaps. Yeah.
right. And there's always progress, and with progress comes consequences, right?
Yeah.
So that's always, archaeologists look at disease progression, you know, when we started domesticating animals, the hopping of diseases from our livestock to humans. And there's just so much that's really cool to study about humans and our history and things that we can learn. And I would love to see more, I'm going to say anthropologists, because that's really my roots, out there helping folks see the broader picture and the holistic one thing changes and affects everything else. So awesome, guys. Well, thanks again. And maybe I'll connect with some of you all out at Gold Butte at a site to talk a little more about preservation and issues and whatever comes up.
Yep, we'd love to have you out here this fall sometime. That would be great.
Yeah, I love to get out there when I can.
Yeah, especially when it's not so hot. So.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right, Rayette. Thank you. And thanks everybody for coming, and we will catch you next time. Thank you so
Yep.
much.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.